Now, I've heard some wild things in history, but this one hits different. It's not just the violence, it's the fact that it really happened, and yet most people have never even heard about it. And I'm gonna need y'all to repost this one, because the way they buried this story, nah, we're not letting this one slide. So get this. In 1949, a peaceful concert was planned in Peekskill, New York. It was meant to raise money for civil rights, and the headliner was one of the most famous black men in the world at the time, Paul Robeson. And just imagine that. You go to hear music you love in the country you live in, you're there to support a cause you believe in. You're not bothering nobody. But people were so full of hate, they organized to show up and cause harm. Over 100 people were injured. Cars were overturned, things were set on fire. Thank God nobody died, but the violence, it was intentional and it was allowed. So let me tell you who Paul Robeson was. He was a world renowned performer. He was famous all over the world, and not just in black communities, but internationally. He was fluent in over 20 languages, and he used them all to speak truth across the borders. He was an actor, an athlete, a scholar, and a freedom fighter. He was internationally known and respected before the US government decided to label him as a problem. And he didn't just sing, he moved people. And one more fun fact, he was born on April 9th, just like me. At one point, Paul Robeson was one of the most famous people in the world. But the fact that you probably never heard of him, that alone tells you everything. He used his platform to speak out against injustice, lynchings, racism, war. He said what so many black folks were thinking at the time. Why should we go fight for a country that won't even fight for us? And that one line, that was enough to paint a target on his back. They called him a communist. Now, let me explain where that even comes from. This was the era of the Cold War, a long, tense standoff between the US and the Soviet Union. And no, it wasn't a war with guns and bombs in the traditional sense. It was a war of ideas. Capitalism versus communism. Both sides were racing to prove they were stronger, military, politically, and even in space. And in America, if you even hinted at agreeing with anything anti-government, they'd call you a communist. That word became a threat, a label, a warning. So when Paul Robeson criticized the government, when he stood up for black people and said we deserve better, that was all it took. Being called a communist wasn't really about politics. It was about control. It was how they turned black voices into enemies of the state. Because if you were black, proud, and not afraid to speak up, they slap that word on you and treat you like a national threat. And it didn't stop with Paul. They did it to Muhammad Ali when he refused to go to Vietnam. They did it to W.E.B. Du Bois, even in his later years. And they did it to Afeni Shakur. Yeah, Tupac's mama. That's why she was wanted by the FBI. So no, it wasn't about communism. It was about shutting people up. And instead of listening, instead of trying to understand, it gave the rest of the country the green light to attack. So now, let's get back to the story. So Paul Robeson was set to perform in August of 1949. But before he even hit the stage, thousands of angry white people showed up. They burned crosses, they hung him in effigy. Now, that only means that they made a fake version of him and hung it. It was like a warning saying, this is what we'd do the real one if we could. They brought bats, rocks, and rage. They beat people in the crowd. 13 people were seriously injured, and the concert had to be shut down. But Paul wasn't backing down. At a press conference after the concert, Paul said, I'm coming back, and this concert is going to happen. So on September 4th, the concert was rescheduled. And this time, over 20,000 supporters showed up. Black folks, union workers, veterans, people ready to stand for justice. They formed a human wall around the stage. And yes, the concert happened. It was peaceful, it was beautiful, it was powerful. But when it ended, the police funneled everyone down one single road. And here's the thing, there was another road they could have taken, but that's not the one the police directed them to. They were funneled straight into danger, and waiting on that road was the mob. They ambushed cars, shattered windshields, dragged families out and beat them in the street. Over 140 people were injured. Even Eugene Bullard, the first black combat pilot in U.S. history, was attacked. So imagine that. Fighting for your country, making history as the first U.S. military pilot, and you're being attacked just for going to a concert. And not just by the mob, by the police. And it was caught on film. But still, nobody was held accountable. 12 people were arrested, but nobody really got in trouble because those being attacked were labeled as communists. So in the eyes of America, that made the violence acceptable. And Paul, he got canceled before cancel culture even had a name. His passport was revoked, he was blacklisted, and silenced. And now, here's the part that makes you want to scream. The people who organized the violence, they put up banners around town and held signs that said, "Wake up, America." Peekskill did. They wanted America to be woke. They were proud of what they did, like they were the heroes. But the real irony, they were the ones rioting and they were the ones setting fires. Now, fast forward to 2025, now they call us too woke and say we're the problem. Make it make sense. And this is why we tell these stories. Because even if they want to forget, we don't. So please, repost this. Let them know we remember, and let them know we're watching. And let them know that truth doesn't stay buried forever. Remember to comment, like, and share. And subscribe for more stories they won't put in your textbook. Peace.